When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be back doing our Song of Ice and Fire reread. And in today's video, we're going to be doing Ned VIII. We're getting into the juicy content. We're getting a little further into the story. We're a little under halfway, I believe, but we are getting there. So we are going to hit Ned VIII. It's actually a fairly short chapter. It's only a couple of pages, but it's full of a lot of content. There's some great foreshadowing to possibly Jon's parentage. There's some great dynamics and or, I think, philosophical arguments that are really interesting to look at with Robert and Ned in this chapter, as the main focus of this chapter is really about the idea of what do we do with Dany and this growing threat of the Targaryens. It's very similar to like an idea of how Bloodraven views the Blackfires and his outlook. It's kind of his viewing point versus a character like Ned, who's more honorable and doesn't want to go down that route. So that's going to be kind of really the big theme of this chapter, looking at the idea of killing, you know, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people very dishonorably, but maybe saving people in the future, or not doing that dishonorable route at all because it is inherently dishonorable. But let's get into the video. We're going to start at page 351. So, the chapter begins with Ned begging for Robert not to do this, and to think about what he is suggesting, and that he is suggesting murdering a child. Again, so in this chapter, it's kind of like we jumped right into the action, whereas in the last chapter we left off with Arya, it was Yoren telling Ned about what happened at the Crossroad Inns. We don't actually see that in the books. It's kind of just something that we kind of skip over, and Ned just knows what happens there. And so we jump into this like small council meeting, and instantly Ned is on Robert's case to not do this. Murdering a child is a bad thing, which I think we can all agree with. Robert roars back, thundering on the table, that Dany is pregnant, and he had tried to warn Ned earlier in the Barrowlands on their way south, but he would not listen, and so now he will. Robert wants Dany, her unborn child, and the fool Viserys all to be killed. Again, this was something that we saw earlier on in the books, where it was kind of foreshadowed for this event where, you know, Ned and Robert were talking about this event, and Ned kind of gets the best of Robert, tempers him down a little bit, and makes him kind of get off the issue and prevents that issue from coming back up. It's something that we're going to learn within this chapter that Jon Arryn has kind of done for years, as Robert has wanted to kill them for a long time, but Jon Arryn was always like, no, don't do that, that's a bad idea, and all of that. So, Ned notes how the other counselors stayed quiet. Again, I want to point out that all of these people really have no sway over Robert. Like, Ned is really the only person that can maybe temper Robert a little bit, as the rest of these people, like Renly, like Littlefinger, like Varys, like Barristan, they really don't have the king's ear. So them objecting to what Robert's saying really puts them in a bad spot, because one, it puts them in bad favor with Robert, and two, there's just no point because they know that they're probably not going to get their way. So even if any of these people had any actual argument against killing Dany, we kind of have to look at the idea that, you know, Barristan is someone that is that honorable, that will stick up and goes with Ned's side. But for a lot of the people, they have nothing really here to gain for going against what Robert is saying here. But another thing I want to point out here is that we've already seen that Ned doesn't have full sway over Robert. Yes, Ned is able to convince Robert here and there, like not going into the tournament and competing in the melee, but at the same time, Ned didn't want the tournament to happen to begin with, and it was something that the Crown really couldn't afford, but Robert wanted it anyway, and Ned couldn't dissuade him. So we've seen that Ned is not maybe as good as Jon Arryn, where Jon Arryn was maybe able to persuade Robert not to do things more than Ned, whereas Ned, it's kind of been about 50-50, I think, on him actually getting his way with Robert. Ned continues saying that you will dishonor yourself forever. And we clearly see a difference here between Ned and Robert. As Robert does not care. He sees the potential threat this poses and is willing to get dirty to solve it before it becomes an issue, and cares nothing of his actual honor. Now, I will say that Robert probably does care a bit about his honor, but I think when you look at the two characters, where Ned, it seems like honor is nearly everything to him. He doesn't want to get his hands dirty. He is not someone that wants to, and when I say get his hands dirty, I mean doing things that are morally bad or dishonorable. Ned will, like, do things that are like fighting and stuff that like are getting your hands dirty, but not like to the point where we're talking about with King's Landing. But the thing here that I really like think is interesting is Robert wrong? I've made a video or two talking about this exact chapter's theme because it's a very interesting one. It's one that's gonna rear its ugly head multiple times throughout the story, and this is kind of the first big moment. But is Robert wrong in the way he's approaching this? Because Dany is going to pose a threat to the throne. The whole idea of Winds of Winter is Dany is finally going to come over to Westeros with her dragons and is going to try and take back the Seven Kingdoms. That's going to lead to thousands of people dying and will probably take over the throne, at least at some point. So, yes, Robert doesn't know this information yet. The dragons are not born yet. Dany is, she's with the Dothraki, so it doesn't really look like they're going to come over. So Robert is kind of seeing where there could be a future problem, which he's correct about. And two, he's kind of coming at this from an emotional standpoint where he's someone that dislikes the Targaryens because of what happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. He is, in a lot of ways, traumatized because of that. So there's a point of, again, Robert has anger, hatred. He wants, revenge, wants to kill off the Targaryens, while at the same time also seeing that this is a future threat to the throne, right? Robert is not someone that's kind of stupid. He understands that something like this, the last time that we really saw a big fight for the throne was the Blackfyre Rebellion, or the Rebellions. And that's something that caused issues for the Targaryens for years. And that's something that I think Robert understands is he is taking the throne. There are obviously going to be people that want the Targaryens back as soon as anything in his reign goes wrong, or if they were to come over, people would possibly join the Targaryens if they thought that they could win. So Robert, again, understands that. And Robert, I think, also understands that he is not the same man that he was, right? Now, Robert, I still think, believes that he could fight, but I think he's a little bit understanding of the fact that, give it, 10, 20 years like Ned is suggesting, Robert could be dead by that point. Robert could be even in a worse physical condition, unable to really fight. And so who is Robert going to have to rely on to take out this invading Dothraki Targaryen force? It would be down to like his heir Joffrey. That's the person that's kind of going to need to step up. And I think that's something that Robert's taking into account as well. I think Robert is trying to, in the best way that he can, secure his throne and his legacy before he dies. Whereas Ned is kind of coming at it from this opposite point of view where, again, it's obviously not good to murder unborn children and children because, again, Dany is very young. Again, we can definitely see Ned's argument. Ned's argument is more based on morality and just logic of we can't predict the future. And when you start trying to take out, future threats or things like that, you kind of go into a dangerous territory because couldn't a lot of people be future threats? And then you're just start killing people. So that's kind of the Ned argument, and I think it's a good one as well. So again, both sides have interesting and compelling arguments. Now, again, I think Ned is probably right in this scenario just based on morality is on his side. And two, you just don't know who Dany's going to become. You don't know where this is going. And like Ned is going to say, like, the Dothraki have never crossed the sea. So it's just, there's a lot of things that look like this is never going to actually be a threat. So again, I think Ned has a lot that works in his favor. Ned tries again to argue, saying that there is still 20 years away from even being an issue for them, if that even exists. Again, because there's so many what ifs here. Now, Varys then pipes up saying, it is. I would not bring lies to the council. And that will get us into page 352. So moving into page 352, kind of the things that Ned is talking about here of why, this may not matter, is that, one, the source is not a good source when you come at it from Ned's point of view. It's Jorah Mormont, who is a traitor. He was selling people into slavery. He was a coward in Ned's eyes. And Varys says that Mormont would not dare lie to him, and that the princess is with child. Again, Ned kind of throws us back saying this is no worry of ours. Like, what if Dany miscarriages? What if the child is a girl? And again, also Ned keeps going saying, even if it is a boy, why should we worry? The Dothraki will not travel over the sea. And I think these are all great points, right? Think about it. Dany is extremely young, and she's not getting the best medical care. It is possible that she could just die. That happens with women all of the time, unfortunately, in this world. House of the Dragon is a clear indicator of this, right? We see multiple characters die because of miscarriages. Now, on the other point of that, a child being a girl. Again, Westeros does not view girls as basically being able to inherit and things like that, which Dany is going to overturn, as she will come over later. But that's not really a worry, again, for the Baratheon dynasty as the moment if she was a girl. And so, yeah, there's a lot of great arguments here from Ned. Now, Robert then argues, what should I do if it is a boy? Should I just wait till they land on our shores? And Ned argues that even Aegon had to grow up and conquer. So is the case here, which again is a great point. Like, it's one thing to kill an unborn baby that you have no idea what they're going to be like, right? This kid that Dany has could end up being a character that isn't a conqueror, isn't any of these great Targaryen warriors that is going to look to reclaim the throne. It could be someone that isn't like that. It could be someone like Aemon, who's a maester, who doesn't have those kind of capabilities. So again, I think there's a lot of things where Robert is kind of blinded by an emotional state where, yes, if this kid that Dany has starts showing signs of that they are going to try and invade Westeros, okay, then you maybe can have this conversation again. But right now, it just seems kind of mute at this point. Robert then says that Ned is extremely stubborn and asks his council to talk sense into Ned. Varys begins by saying it has pained him to report this news, and he understands Ned's pain, but those who rule sometimes must do vile things for the good of the realm. And this is a fantastic line for Varys, because it's kind of what Varys' persona is, especially to kind of like the public and what he says he's doing, right? He is someone that believes that you can do evil actions, that you can do bad actions for the good of the common person or the people so that they can maybe have a better ruler. Now, I've talked about this in depth where this doesn't really make a lot of sense because Varys seems very fixated on young Griff becoming the king, when in a lot of ways he has helped destabilize a lot of rulers that had relative peace. If we even look at Tommen, right? Tommen was someone that had people around him with Kevin Lannister, Marjorie, that could have had a good regime, very prosperous for the people, and still Varys like undoes that. So Varys is to me a character that he says this, and this is kind of what he projects to people, but it's not really his full motivation. Renly then states the Targaryens should have been killed a long time ago, but Robert had always listened to Jon Arryn's counsel instead of not doing so. Again, Renly, this just kind of comes off from Renly like he doesn't really care. Like, this doesn't really affect him, and so he just, why bother? Like, why let this threat linger when we have the power to extinguish this fire? I think that's the way Renly is kind of taking this. And Ned fires back saying that mercy is not always bad, and that take the trident, Robert spared Barristan even after killing dozens of good men and friends of theirs, and even when Roose Bolton had said to cut his throat, Robert disagreed, saying he will not kill a man for great fighting, and sent his own maesters to cure his injuries. Which is a really amazing thing to show from Robert, because Robert had been injured at the Battle of the Trident to begin with, right? He had taken injuries from Rhaegar. It's the reason Robert is not the person leading the loyalist or the rebel forces to King's Landing. And so that shows a lot about Robert's character, and it also shows that Robert really respects people that are able to fight well. And what this really shows as well is a nice little drop of who Roose Bolton is as well. We've gotten very little information as to the Boltons at all up to this point. And when you have Roose Bolton's first like real name drop being he wanted to kill Barristan just because he was on the other side, he was a Kingsguard, and for killing, again, the opposite people, again, that's his job. So it really shows a lot how brutal Roose Bolton can be and kind of the way he takes on the world. So that's really interesting to think about as we're going to get introduced into his character soon. But yeah, so that'll move us into page 353. So, moving into page 353, Ned then coldly finishes by saying, "If only that man were here today." Robert complains that these two were very different circumstances. Barristan was a Kingsguard, and Ned finishes by saying, and this is a 14-year-old girl, and asks, "What did we rebel against Aerys for?" "To stop the killing of innocent children," and Robert fires back, "To kill Targaryens." Now, this is an interesting line because I'm going to note this is the first real clue, in my opinion, to Jon's parentage in this chapter, if you believe he's a Targaryen, is that Ned, there's a very common theme that whenever Ned brings up children or anything like that being killed, Robert kind of fires back that they're either a Targaryen, and this kind of prompts Ned to bring up either Rhaegar or Lyanna, which, again, are possibly Jon's parents. Like, again, the first time when they have this conversation, when this is all happening, and Ned and Robert are discussing killing Dany, what gets brought up is Lyanna. Ned brings up Lyanna, and that's put into the chapter as, I think, as a nice little wink to Jon's parents. Now, again, I want you to think about in Ned's mind why he would be so frustrated. Because if Jon was a Targaryen, this is kind of confirming in Ned's mind that what he did was right. Because if he would have allowed Jon's parentage to come out, that Rhaegar and Lyanna were his parents, Robert would have tried to kill him. It doesn't matter who the Targaryen is, they pose a threat. And that's what Robert is really showing in this, where even an unborn child that has not shown any merit, we don't even know if it's a boy or a girl yet, is a threat to Robert and wants to kill them. So again, I think that's a great point. And another idea that I really love is the idea that, you rebel against this dictatorship, but yet you've, in a way, become that dictatorship again. And that's something that's just, when you look at the idea of having kings and queens and these things, is that's just very common. You have one bad king, and then you go to the next. So I think that was a nice little interesting point that George brings in. But again, we see that Ned very interestingly mentions Rhaegar. Again, the second time either Rhaegar or Lyanna are mentioned by Ned after Robert wants to kill Dany and Viserys. Ned says that he never knew Robert to fear Rhaegar or to tremble at the shadow of an unborn baby. Again, a very interesting line here. Again, fearing Rhaegar, that's something that Ned knows is going to get something out of Robert. And an interesting choice of words, tremble at the shadow of an unborn baby. Again, this could be the shadow of, say, a character like Jon, who could have been, again, the person people rallied behind as being the person on the throne. Jon is the person that probably Arthur Dayne died to protect because he thought this is the last Targaryen for the throne at this point. Now, Robert turns purple and says, "Not another word," and reminds Ned who the king is. Very interesting line because, again, Tywin points out later with a character like Joffrey that saying you are the king does not make you powerful. It makes you look kind of weak. And Ned throws it right back into his face, asking if he has forgotten who the king is. Again, it shows the idea that Robert is just, he doesn't have the power that he thinks he does, right? He's in debt to the Lannisters. He is relying on people like Littlefinger and Varys, who are at their own times destroying the crown and sowing discord. So again, it's a really nice little moment for that. Robert says that he is sick of the talk and asks the council what they say. Renly agrees they need to die. Varys sadly says it must happen. But then Barristan disagrees. He says there's honor in facing an enemy in a battlefield, but none in killing him in the mother's womb, and stands with Ned. Pycelle then says something that I think is very interesting and is really the crucial part of Robert's argument on morality. Pycelle says that he counseled Aerys as loyally as he could, and now does the same for Robert. He means her no ill will, but if she lives and has a son, how many thousands will die, towns and cities burned? Is it not kind to her to end this now? And again, it's a great way of arguing Robert's point if you would want to. I think the counter here is that you don't know those things are going to happen. I mean, that's just, you just don't know that's going to happen, right? And not every Targaryen that's born becomes this conqueror character. I mean, think about, for instance, Daeron the Good Sons, right? He had 2 that were warriors and 2 that were not warriors at all. His son Aerys, again, is someone that was very bookish and let Bloodraven rule the kingdoms. He was not someone that would have fit this definition of being a conqueror, killing thousands, burning towns and cities. But I also want to note that there's actually a little bit of a wink to the Maester conspiracy here. Pycelle says something very interesting. He says his order does not serve a ruler, but the realm. Very interesting, because in my opinion, that's not what their job is at all. Their job is to, again, as the Maester, you are supposed to help your lord do, whether that's reading scrolls, whether that's sending messages, whether that's, instructing their children, whether it's that or this. Your job really is to just follow your lord. And when Pycelle brings up that it's not to serve a ruler, but to serve the realm, okay, well, that opens up some things, because what does that mean? You've already talked about with Varys that he tries to serve the realm, but he has his own perspective into how to do that. Pycelle is someone that's not different at all. He is someone that is very much a Lannister guy, and he thinks by serving the realm, that's by putting the Lannisters in power and Tywin in power, because that's what's best for the realm. So, again, that'd be interesting to see if a lot of Maesters also have this sentiment of serving the realm, not the ruler, because instinctively that's not really what they should be doing at all, because it can be very subjective as to what is serving the realm. Varys even agrees to this, saying it was well said, and that if a son was born to her, the kingdoms would bleed. And that gets us into page 354. Now, up to this moment, Littlefinger has been very silent. He's kind of seemed bored, just not interested in this topic whatsoever. And he says, when you are in bed with an ugly woman, it is better to just get on with it. And more or less, Littlefinger is just saying when you're faced with an ugly or dirty task, you might as well just get through with it. Don't think on it. Don't brood on it. Just do it and move on. And that's interesting because in a lot of ways, I really don't think that's the way Littlefinger plays the game. He's someone that thinks out his plans. When he has something that's like, oh yeah, I'm going to either kill Joffrey or help kill Joffrey, let's think about what that's going to do. Let's think about the repercussions for that, and how do I put it into a situation where I'm not someone that is a possible suspect. So again, I think that's interesting the way that Littlefinger says this, because it is kind of how Littlefinger does things. He doesn't really care if things are dirty as long as they benefit him. But the way that he says it is not exactly the way he does it anyway. Robert then says, there you have it, Ned. You and Barristan are outvoted. He then asks who will kill her, and Renly suggests Mormont, as he is desperate for a royal pardon. Which is true, but at the same time, Varys points out he also values his life. Varys says that by now they are approaching Vaes Dothrak, where it is forbidden to even draw a weapon. If Jorah was to use it on the Khaleesi and her son, his punishment would be worse than death. His torture would be brutal. But then Varys offers an alternative. What about the Tear of Lys? So that Drogo would be none the wiser as to how it happened. It would just be like kind of a natural death, which is interesting considering Jon Arryn's death, which no one picks up on, including Robert. Again, it's this idea that, oh yeah, poison would just make it to where it looks like it would be a natural death, which I don't actually agree with. Dany at this point is a very healthy 14-year-old girl. It's one thing for Dany to die in childbirth and another for her to just randomly get a sickness and die. It would look much more suspicious, but it would be harder to like prove that this is what happened. So I do think it's a better option, but it's not the best route. Pycelle gives a look of disapproving, and Robert also seems uncomfortable with this and says poison is a coward's weapon, which is very interesting. You're going to murder an unborn child and a 14-year-old, and you're worried about how it happens? It seems a little weird, and this is kind of that moment where I would say, like, Robert does have some, like, piece of honor and, like, chivalry. It's just it's been lessened through the years, and I think King's Landing, being in this place, being king, dealing with all these Sly and And people like Varys and Littlefinger have made it to where he's less of a man at this point when it comes to that side of him. And again, Ned kind of agrees with this. He pipes up. Here they are, plotting to kill a 14-year-old girl and a baby. And Robert is talking about honor. Ned points this out and says Robert should do it himself. The man that passeth the sentence should swing the sword and hear her last cries and pleas. Again, it just goes back to the way Ned views killing, and how if you're going to send someone to die, you should be the one to do it and feel that it is just, right? Regardless of what they're crying or pleading about, if you believe that they committed that crime, you should have the guts and or honor to look them in the eye as you kill them. At this, Robert explodes into a fury, throwing his cup against the wall as it is out of wine, and he calls for it to be done, and that is the end of it. Ned will have no part of it, and will not fix his seal upon this decision. It took a moment for Robert to understand what he was saying, as Robert was not used to defiance. Again, Robert is a character that is not really denied anything at any point. So when you see Ned basically throwing this back in his face, basically saying he will not be hand of the king for this, and sign off on this, it's something that just takes Robert off, and he doesn't have the patience for this anymore. And I think it's just Ned standing behind his ideals, not someone that backs down even when faced with a difficult situation, which is very admirable from Ned. Robert then angrily says that he is the king's hand and will do what he commands. If he will not do the duty, he will find someone else who will. Ned wishes him luck and leaves his hand pin on the table, remembering the man Robert had been. Now again, this puts Ned in a very precarious position, because Ned has gone from the second most powerful man to someone that's pissed off Robert and really has no position. If there was ever a point where Ned was vulnerable up to this point, it is now. It's now at this point, and something we're going to see as Ned plans his escape from King's Landing. Ned has one final remark as he notes how he thought Robert was more noble and a better man. At this, Robert tells him to be gone and go back to Winterfell. If he sees him again, he will have his head on a spike. Ned then leaves, with Robert's eyes on him the entire time. With that, the conversation continues like nothing had even happened. As Pycelle notes, the faceless men can do it, which Littlefinger complains they are too expensive, especially for a princess. And again, the fact that Pycelle brings a faceless man up to do this, like, we're really getting deep with this. Like, we're trying to make sure it's 100% done. And again, we do not have the coin for this. So is this Pycelle just in a position where, oh yeah, let's just take another loan from the Lannisters? Is kind of that the way it's going? Why is Pycelle going straight to the faceless men? It's a very interesting point there. Again, I don't think that Robert would actually hurt Ned in that point, as we're going to see later on anyway. Like, he wouldn't. But it is something that is interesting to point out. Again, Ned's position is not looking great right now. Ned then heads to the Tower of the Hand and finds Vayan Poole and instructs him that he is the Hand no longer and they must leave rather quickly, as Robert did threaten to kill him. And that will get us into page 356. Ned did not truly think that Robert would hurt him, but with Tyrion also being captured by Cat, things were not looking particularly good. So there was a lot of things kind of compounding at this moment. You have one where Catelyn makes a huge political blunder and really puts Ned into a bad position. Two, you now have Ned has lost his position at court and now is in a very vulnerable state. He doesn't really have that power anymore. He still has some, but not to the extent. He also does not have Robert's ear either. So Ned is in a really bad position at this point, and Catelyn has made it much worse. But Ned does note that Robert would not care for Tyrion, but it would wound his pride, and who knows what Cersei would. Ned tells Poole that he, the girls, and a few guards will also go ahead, and the rest of the party can follow after, as there are many eyes, and he does not want his plans known. Ned starts to think how it would be good to be going back home to Winterfell, and how maybe when he returns, he and Cat can make another son. They were not too old. Again, Ned is only in his 30s, so he's definitely right about this. He had also been dreaming of the snow and the wolfwood at night. Again, maybe this was a calling, that he was getting these dreams and just a warning sign to come back to Winterfell. And yet, this angered Ned. So much was left uncovered in his discoveries about Jon's death. He had some evidence to justify thinking that Jon was murdered, but he was not sure by who. With this, he also notes how, if he leaves the council of cravens and flatterers, they will beggar the realm, or worse, sell it to the Lannister, again because of the deep debt. At this moment, it strikes Ned. Why not go by sea? He could go discuss things with Stannis and figure out what's going on. But that leaves an interesting question. Why figure it out at this point anyway? You're not going to be in King's Landing. You're not going to have any effect on the politics anymore. So why find out the secret to begin with? It could put Ned in an even more precarious position if he found out crucial information that could maybe put his family at risk. But that gets us into page 357. Ned knows that he had asked Pycelle to send Stannis a letter to return, but this went unanswered, which only further backed Ned's suspicion that Stannis shared the secret Jon died for. He then thinks, what will he do? Again, looking at the idea that I talked about, what will he do if he finds these secrets? And some of them are better left hidden. Again, I want to point this out, that Ned, directly after he thinks of Dragonstone, the seat of House Targaryen, he specifically thinks that some secrets are too dangerous to be shared, even with the ones you love and trust. Again, this comes in a chapter where Targaryen children are going to be killed, and Robert has proved in this chapter that he would want Jon killed if he was Rhaegar's. I just think it fits perfectly, right? You have this idea of Ned knowing that there's a secret he cannot tell even people he loves like Catelyn. And why would that be? Because it's something that, if it got out, could mean Jon's death. And it's safer to just not tell anyone, because Catelyn is kind of a blabbermouth, and she's not very good at being secretive. Ned then looks at the knife and thinks, why would Tyrion want to kill Bran? It was to silence him, of course, but was this connected to Jon Arryn's murder? Or something else entirely, its own little secret plot going on? And Ned is actually kind of on the right track, because the two aren't really connected when you really think about it. Because in one situation, it was Joffrey doing it, more than likely, and the other was Littlefinger, and the two were not actually connected events. Ned then questions if Robert could be a part of this plot. At first, he could not have believed it, but now Robert was willing to kill women and children. Cat had tried to warn him, but he had not accepted it. Ned then notes he will look for a ship north and asks Vane Poole to find one. Very shortly after Vane Poole had left to find a ship, Fat Tom announces that Littlefinger is here to see him. Ned was tempted to deny him, but he has to continue the game until he leaves. Ned asks what he wants, and Littlefinger says he won't be long, as he is on his way to dine with Lady Tonda, as she wants to marry him to one of her daughters. And this will get us into our last page of the chapter, page 358. So, page 358, Ned did not want to take away from his dinner, and says that at the moment he cannot think of anyone else's company he desires less than Littlefinger. Now, I want to point this out. Ned continuously makes fun of Littlefinger, continuously insults him. The idea here that people think that Ned truly trusted Littlefinger is beyond me, because Ned shows all of the signs that he knows Littlefinger is not someone to be friends with, to trust. It's the idea that when Ned gets betrayed by the Golden Cloaks, that's all he had, right? If he had no other plan that he could have done at that point. And so, yes, he could have done something like going with Renly, but that wasn't Ned's character. And so, again, I just want to point that out. Littlefinger counters this, saying, you could probably think of a few, Varys, Robert, Cersei, and that Robert had gone on about Ned well after he had left. Littlefinger then proceeds to seat himself and says that it was up to him to convince them not to use a faceless man. And then instead, Varys will quietly let it out that there is a title for her death. Ned is appalled by this, saying we give titles to assassins now. And Littlefinger says, titles are cheap, and faceless men are not. And goes as far as by saying he did Dany a kindness. Someone may make a bad attempt, and then the Dothraki won't let it happen again. If it was a faceless man, she would be as good as dead. Ned then frowns and says, "Do you take me as a fool? You are not worried about her safety." Again, Ned is completely correct here. Littlefinger does not give two shits about Daenerys in this moment. It's just him kind of saving face, if anything. Littlefinger responds yes, that he thinks Ned is an enormous fool. Ned asks if he finds murder amusing, and Littlefinger says no. It's Ned he finds amusing. Again, Littlefinger is throwing it right back at Ned with the verbal insults. And again, it's just interesting the way that I think people fully believe that Ned trusted Littlefinger, or Ned trusted Littlefinger, and that just isn't the case in my opinion. Littlefinger notes that Ned is treading on rotten ice and is leaning towards falling in soon. And Littlefinger notes, "I think the first splash happened today." Ned notes the first and his last. Again, great foreshadowing as to what is going to happen with Ned in this book. Again, leading to his inevitable death. And we just look at today was a lot of mistakes for Ned. Ned with, again, the capture of Tyrion, with what Catelyn did, puts, again, the Lannisters really on Ned's back. The pressure is coming in. War is kind of sparking between the two sides. You then also have Ned losing status, losing position, losing favor with the king, someone that could protect him. And all of that's kind of falling apart. And Ned, again, is at this moment where he's kind of ready to leave. Now, I don't really know if Ned should have said "and his last," because then it really implies that Ned is leaving and Ned wanting to keep that a secret. But maybe Ned's thinking Littlefinger's smart enough to already have figured that out. And I think that's true, right? I don't really think there was only really any reason to hide it from Littlefinger. Littlefinger knew that was going to happen. Littlefinger asks when he will leave, and Ned responds as soon as he can and asks why he cares. Littlefinger says he does not care, but if he is still here this evening, he will take him to the brothel, and that Jory has failed to find and won't even tell Cat. Again, just this idea that Littlefinger's like, "Oh yeah, Ned, I don't really care if you leave, but there is some more evidence if you would like it on Jon Arryn and his death." It's a great little way of Littlefinger kind of pulling Ned in and keeping him in King's Landing long enough so that his plan can go off. And again, just a great finale to the chapter. This is a fantastic chapter. Even though it's kind of a shorter one, page length-wise, it's one of those chapters that's filled with so much great writing. It's filled with so much foreboding, foreshadowing, even some things to look at with other characters like Jon and his parentage. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.